Hi everyone, this is Ali John Chaudhary, psychotherapist, and I'm so glad to be here today with author Fern Schumer Chapman because today we have a special episode. We're going to be talking about fawning and sibling estrangement. Now, fawning is an increasing way that some of our viewers face when they experience sibling estrangement within their family. It's a trauma survival strategy that can play out sometimes from childhood into full grown adulthood with a sibling. So, in today's episode, we'll explore what that can look like with respect to psychologist Ingrid Clayton's important approach towards fawning and trauma in combination with what we know from other trauma research. So, Fern, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, great to be here. I wish I were where you are. It's a beautiful setting you've got there.
Thank you.
Um, Growing up in an unstable or abusive or chaotic home is one of the risk factors for estrangement. And in those homes, love is conditional, authenticity is not valued, and children feel unsafe. And so, to survive these unpredictable environments, children learn to read the room, and they are constantly taking the emotional temperature and gauging the mood of those who are unpredictable in their family. And that's what leads to fawning. And the problem with fawning is this is a survival skill you learn in childhood and you continue in adulthood until you become extremely aware of it and make a concerted effort to change it.
Absolutely. And that's really important for our viewers to understand that this can eventually play against you. It starts off as a survival tactic that can end up pouring into other areas of our lives and affecting our choices and such.
Well, really, you become distant from yourself because you don't know who you are if you are constantly fawning.
Yes, very, very true. When you're otherly directed to an
Right.
excessive manner, then that creates, of course, these types of issues. So let's talk about some of the points that we've been mentioning before the video here. There's a few points that touch upon Ingrid Clayton's approach to this, and also, of course, trauma approaches in general. I've talked about some of this as well too. So, one point that is important to mention is hyper-attuning to the siblings' moods and reactions. I think that's one of the things that happens with people in our community, right? In toxic sibling dynamics, fawning often looks like constantly scanning the sibling's tone, language, and facial expressions, right? Trying to predict and neutralize their anger, criticism, or emotional volatility, which I think is common here with a lot of us, walking on eggshells, right? To avoid triggering them, for instance, right? And I think Clayton would say that this is the child's emotional radar surviving into adulthood, right?
Radar, yes, exactly. And if you've been raised by a narcissistic parent, this is a very common response.
Mm-hmm. And it's like if you can stay perfectly attuned, you may think that you can prevent the explosion,
Right?
right?
This is trying to control the uncontrollable.
Right, exactly, right. And that's trying to exercise influence in areas where we have little to no influence when it comes to the other person,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
So that's very important what she was mentioning there. And another one that kind of leads us into this is avoiding confrontations at all costs, right? Fawning in sibling relationships often looks like not addressing hurtful comments, which I constantly mention as being the incompleteness factor, right? Things are left incomplete and such, and you never quite get the answers you're looking for. It can involve staying quiet during conflict, pretending you're not bothered, uh, letting the sibling rewrite events, for example, right? And Clayton would view this as an internal rule that's baked into the nervous system, right? She would say, I must stay agreeable to stay safe.
Yeah, avoiding confrontation at all costs is really a problem for people who don't know who they are. How can you possibly make a position or a stance or a statement when you really are unaware of who you are and your own authenticity? And that's why this becomes common with fawning.
Yeah, yeah, people watering themselves down so much that they don't know themselves anymore, right?
Right.
A really, really
Or
important
never
point.
had the opportunity to get to know themselves.
Exactly, right? When you're busy always looking at your environment, others and such, then you're not focused on who you are. So
In a lot of ways, it's very much a result of hyperarousal.
yeah,
And scanning the landscape.
right? And that leads us to our next point, right? Minimizing your own needs, which is kind of what we're mentioning here, boundaries or grievances as well that are minimized. So it's not a big deal. I don't want to cause drama, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'll just let it go. It's fine. I'm used to it, and I think this is interesting because it's a type of capitulation, right, where people basically tend to just agree for the sake of not wanting to stir the waters, right? And I was talking about this in the support group just recently, and we called it acclimation, right?
Mm.
Where you're acclimating in some ways. And what that does is that makes that the person that's on top of the social hierarchy in the family, they're the ones that end up basically benefiting from this at our expense.
Well, and another word for it is enabling.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, right? That's what ends up happening with this. And Clayton emphasizes that fawners invalidate their own experience to maintain connection. So they confuse self sacrifice with love, silence with peace, abandoning themselves with keeping the relationship intact. Hmm.
Yeah, it's really a dangerous path because you're giving every piece of yourself to somebody else
Mhm.
and never having any ownership in any stake really
Yeah,
in the connection. And
yeah,
it's just not a winning formula.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's really, really important to be mindful of that and such when people fall into these types of behaviors. And a lot of times, people that are fawning will take on the emotional labor of the sibling relationship, right? This is another point that you and I have talked about before, but that is especially important to our community, right? And this is extremely common with a lot of people's stories, right? You're the only one that always checks in and such. You know, you mediate family conflicts, you soothe over the siblings' conflicts with others, you make excuses for them, or you're the default peacemaker, right? And I think that Clayton would see this fawning rooted in childhood parentification or scapegoating roles, especially.
Yeah, this is the breeding ground for fixers.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So when you're doing that, then again, you're negating yourself, right? You're the one always making the effort. You're the one pulling the weight, the emotional weight in the family and such.
And you could probably comment on this better than I can, but I suspect this is one of the reasons why estrangement so batters self-esteem.
Hmm. Yes, yes, because a lot of times you take this on, right?
Right.
Personalization, right?
Right.
You make it about you, right? You
And then
put
you get rejected and you feel worse about yourself than you
yeah,
did even when you tried all of this.
exactly. So it cycles, right? You go through this cycle over and over again, and then you can just basically try to fawn to get out of it, but then it's again you making the extra effort. It's again coming back to you somehow as having to fix the problem, right?
You know, I think I've said this to you before, but when I've been in a situation like this and been unaware of this terrible pattern, I felt at times like a whale who was eating my own blubber. You know, you just
Yeah,
keep giving more and more of yourself, and you are dying and starving, and you're not really improving the connection.
exactly, right? That's very, very true. That's a good image to think about, right? And such,
The
right?
whale.
But it helps. It helps to understand how much self-sacrifice has a cost to us, right?
Yeah.
So, the next point is over apologizing, even when the sibling caused the harm. So the fawning sibling can often feel responsible for fixing the problem, making things right, not ruining the family harmony. So they apologize excessively, saying, I'm sorry you're upset. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. I'm sorry if I sounded emotional. So Clayton really views this as a shame based submission. I must take blame to restore connection. And that's dangerous when it comes to our sibling relationships.
Yeah, I think this is a real red flag. If you find yourself apologizing all the time, you have to ask yourself, what are you really taking responsibility for? Why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, really, really important to be mindful of that, and especially if you're taking on the load and such. So the next point is avoiding expressing their own preferences, personality, or identity, right? So a lot of times fawning involves suppressing one's real opinions, staying agreeable to keep the sibling comfortable, keep aspects of their private life private if they fear judgment, for example, downplaying accomplishments to avoid triggering jealousy or criticism. So a lot of times what this means is that people become a smaller version of themselves around their sibling.
I mean, it's basically lacking authenticity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's a hard one, especially I think for a lot of people, right? When you're
And by the way, this is like little nibbles out of your whale.
yes, yes, exactly. So it's very important to show up in relationships. I often use this term to show up, showing up in relationships, right? Don't just wing it and don't just let somebody else steer it. You can steer the relationship as well. So, yeah. The next point is rationalizing or normalizing harmful behavior. So, Fawner often reframes toxic sibling behavior in softer terms, right? They're just stressed. They had it worse than me. Um, that's just how they are. I shouldn't take things so personally, right? And I think that Clinton really connects this to trauma bonding, right? Justifying the harm becomes a way to keep the connection intact, right? Where you're watering yourself down again, your needs matter less.
I've written pieces about enabling, and these statements that you just listed come right out of it. And the enabling is often pressed by other family members. They're, your mother says they're just stressed. They had it worse than me, or whatever.
Yep,
And that's just playing into their hand.
yep, yep. I remember we did a video on enabling as well too, and touched upon some of these elements as well.
Mhm.
So it's also important for people to be aware of how these dynamics interplay with them and how we can fall into enabling if we're not careful. So,
And how easy it is for those words to roll off your tongue.
right, exactly. Explain it away, right, as they say. So the next point is feeling responsible for the siblings' happiness, choices, or emotional regulation, right? So the fawning often, the fawners will often believe if they're upset, I failed. If they reject me, it's my fault. If I stop trying, the whole thing will fall apart. So this belief really drives decades of over functioning, right?
Wow. Yeah. There you go, right there. If they're upset, I failed. If they reject me, it's my fault.
Right.
These are the traps that the fawners fall into.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we really need to be careful about that, right? I think especially with this, because a lot of times people will again take on over responsibility, right? Make it about themselves, personalize it, right? And this is the issue that a lot of people in the community are facing is to be able to reduce personalization, eliminate that.
Well, this is also the fast track to fixing.
Yep. Right. When you make it about you, then yeah, you can try to influence something, but in reality, you're influencing something that is not in your control.
Right.
So very important. So next point is suppressing anger until it becomes estrangement, right? And this is one of Clinton's core insights, right? The fawn response hides conflict for years. They eventually get to a point where a boundary is attempted. Uh, then eventually the sibling reacts poorly. The fawner realizes the relationship was always conditional. And suddenly, estrangement feels like the only non self abandoning option, right?
Wow. Yeah. I'm not sure. Is it possible, really, Ollie John, to rebuild after a lifetime of this dynamic?
That's a big question, but I think that if the elements of safety are there, the elements of making room for another person, right, where there can be shared power in a dynamic, then yes, that's what needs to happen. Otherwise, it's the unevenness that fawning creates that really starts to grind people down. And I think that you and I have talked about this, right, about how estrangement is a process, how it differs from ghosting, right? Ghosting is avoidance largely, right? Whereas estrangement is a series of failures that we may have had with our sibling over time that eventually led us to either ourselves take a step back and say, I'm done playing this game, or all of a sudden that the volatility wins over and that the relationship just breaks apart without ever getting real answers for why on the part of our sibling. So these things do happen, especially when it comes to that, and that's the sad thing because if we're not careful, it can be very insidious with fawning.
I think it's pretty tough to rebuild after this dynamic has been in place for decades.
Hmm. Absolutely, because the points of reference you have are very negative points,
Mhm.
right? And that's the thing that happens when you look back. You have pleasant memories, you have shared memories, you have a sense of belonging. Oftentimes the case is no. And
Yeah.
that's the hard thing, I think, with this, because usually healthy relationships are built on belonging and common memories. So, very important to consider how fawning can be destructive to sibling relationships. Now, the final point we want to mention is somatic cues of fawning, right? And this is very Clayton specific, right? In sibling interactions, the fawn response is often visible in the body, right? Tight smile, raised shoulders, shallow breathing, nervous nodding, lowered voice, tension in the jaw or stomach. So Clayton highlights that fawning is automatic and nervous system based. It's not always a conscious choice. So
Mhm.
that's very, very important for us to remember that it goes
Yeah, it's
through our
been
bodies.
programmed since childhood. But there are ways to become aware of this and to make changes. So, one is to recognize the fawning response and name the patterns, to embrace the discomfort and try to have a genuine connection that's worth the risk. Let go of the unrealistic patterns and expectations. Practice boundaries, which is so difficult for fawners. And then, of course, to seek professional support in individual or group settings.
Absolutely. Very, very important as well, right? And I think safety comes first, right? Like if it all goes through the body, as Clayton mentions, of course, very important for us also to realize that there are some body-based approaches that we can work with as well, that can help us, especially. So seeking grounding strategies in therapy is important as well, so that people can get some help if they feel that they're stuck in these particular areas. So this is very important for us to work on, like you said, in various ways that we can change things here and there, where we can fine tune perhaps our responses so we don't enable this or don't create conditions where we're minimizing or watering ourselves down to the point of self abandonment. So very, very important.
Well, I love what she says about unfawning. She says, unfawning ourselves is welcoming ourselves to the party to finally be ourselves.
Absolutely. And you and I have talked often about reclaiming ourselves,
Mhm.
and that's exactly what this is all about. So great. This has been a great episode, Fern. I'm really, really happy that we've been able to talk about this. This is so important for our viewers. I think this has been a very empowering conversation for us and for them as well. And let's talk about resources now. What would be your number one resource at this time?
Well, I continue to do one-on-one coaching, and we can have endless discussions about fawning if you'd like.
That's a very, very important, right? To have a space where we can feel safe to do that. One of the safe spaces that I create, of course, is the Sibling Estrangement support group on Zoom. So this is usually a twice weekly support group that is offered for people to have some grounding advice, especially, and to have some practical oriented suggestions to help them to get beyond the places where they get stuck. So it's really important to meet others of like mind where they can experience a sense of safety as well with others going through this. I also offer workshops on this particular subject. I offer some workshops on rumination, and also there is one coming up actually in a few days, which is going to be navigating the stages of grief with sibling estrangement. So this is a first in terms of a roadmap that I'm offering when it comes to going through this particular type of grief. And so people can reach out to me if they want as well too. I do offer some individual services as well as a psychotherapist. So course, very important that we can empower ourselves, especially on this important subject, Fern. And I'm glad that you and I are able to bring this out to viewers so that they can, in turn, empower themselves and live a better version of their lives. Always great to
Good
have
to
you here,
be with
Fern.
you.
All right. Well, great to do this again. And I look forward to speaking with you again.
Me too.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.